Every time I make a video talking about arguments or drama in the magic community, I nearly always get a comment that says something along the lines of, "Hey, back in my day we never had any of this magician drama nonsense. Magicians just got on with it and got on with each other." And while I wish that was true, it is just not the case at all. In fact, years ago, arguments between magicians could get so out of hand, much more than they would nowadays. And so I want to make a little mini-series looking back at some of these dramas from years gone by. Today, we're going to time travel back to the 1800s and one of the most dramatic stories of magicians locking horns. And it is absolutely wild. This story includes multiple cases of audiences storming the stage, rioting at shows, smashing up props, even knife wounds, and so much more. It is chaotic and brilliant to look back on. So let's dive into the story of the Davenport Brothers. Alright, first things first, who were the Davenport Brothers? Well, they were of course brothers, a double act in magic, made up of Ira Erastus Davenport, what a fantastic name, and William Henry Davenport, a semi-fantastic name. And these two were magicians who presented their tricks as if supernatural powers were at play. They claimed they were in touch with the spirit world and that spirits were making the magic happen. They are most well known for their spirit cabinet effect, which you may have seen other magicians replicate, where a magician is tied up inside a cabinet and then musical instruments would start to play, or bells would start to ring, or objects would be thrown out of the cabinet, supposedly coming from the spirit world. They started performing in the 1850s and were joined by a magician called William Fay, and together with their father as well, who was basically their manager, they drew a crowd like moths to a flame. Bearing in mind, this was just after spiritualism as a movement had become really popular, and so anything that proposed, the psychic world, it just drew crowds. They were a global sensation, and basically the household name for spiritualism. They toured the United States for 10 years before moving to England, and it was when they moved to England that things started to go a little bit downhill. A group called the Ghost Club decided to investigate their claims. They were suspicious that supernatural powers were really at play, and so they did a bit of digging. And a very famous magician called Harry Keller, who I'm sure you will have heard of if you're watching this channel. Harry Keller was an absolute beast of magic, and he joined the Ghost Club to try and expose the Davenport Brothers. A lot of magicians were starting to get very suspicious about the claims that they had. In fact, after some time, William Fay decided to leave the Davenport Brothers and join Harry Keller and become a magic team with him. So the cracks were already starting to show in the Davenport Brothers act, and things only got worse. This is where John Neville Maskelyne and George Cook step into the fray. Maskelyne and Cook were two iconic magicians of the era, and they decided to expose the Davenport Brothers in the most brutal way possible. I mean, can you imagine this happening in the modern day? Absolutely not. They decided to replicate the entirety of the Davenport Brothers show and put it on as their own magic show and claim that no supernatural powers were involved. They wanted to prove that everything the Davenport Brothers did, they could do, even though they weren't psychic and they had no connection to the beyond. It is so bold and daring, and it probably annoyed the Davenport Brothers more than I can imagine. To add insult to injury, Maskelyne and Cook weren't even the only magicians to do this. John Henry Anderson and Robert Houdin, literally the godfather of modern magic, put on shows duplicating the Davenport Brothers' effects and wrote exposés for the public showing step by step how the Davenport Brothers could achieve it without supernatural powers. I mean, these guys were being ripped into and exposed as frauds multiple times. But did it stop people going to their shows? Absolutely not. They were still making lots and lots of money and still putting on these shows for people who were true believers. One skeptic who went to a Davenport Brothers show described it as mere conjuring of no very high order, which I think is an absolutely brilliant quote. Another two skeptics decided they would take it a little step further, and they followed the Davenport Brothers around on tour in the hope that they would be selected as participants in the show. And they were. In a Liverpool show, they were brought on stage and were chosen as the volunteers who would tie the Davenport Brothers up in the Spirit Cabinet Act. And they decided to do something very, very sneaky, which I don't know how I feel about it, but instead of just tying a normal knot, they tied something called a fool's knot, which is apparently very, very difficult to get out of. And so, essentially, they tied up I mean, that is like the ultimate form of heckling, isn't it? That is the most difficult spectator. So during this show in Liverpool, the Davenport brothers are trying desperately to get out of this knot that has been tied, so much so that they have to call on the stage manager to come out on stage and cut the knot with a knife because they cannot get out of it. This must be so embarrassing for them. And as they're cutting themselves out of the knot, they literally cut their hand open and start bleeding. Like, it is chaos at this point. Obviously, it goes without saying that at this point the trick is ruined, right? Because the audience now realise that in order for this trick to work, the Davenport brothers have to get out of the ropes. And so the audience are so annoyed, they start to riot. During the riots, in amongst the chaos, audience members storm the stage and literally smash the spirit cabinet to pieces. As if all of that wasn't bad enough, the exposures and the duplicate shows continued just one after another. There were magicians in Paris, magicians in Manchester, actually, just where I live, around the corner from me. There were magicians putting on shows, tearing down the brothers. And it brings me to an important question. Was all of this really necessary? Is it really fair to put on an entire show dedicated to ruining the career of another magician? You could not get away with that now. I guarantee you just couldn't. Now, quite interestingly, Harry Houdini claims in his book, A Magician Among the Spirits, that Ira Erastus Davenport had confessed to him in private that, yeah, the Davenport brothers are fake. Everything we do is just totally made up. Which is so interesting. Why would he tell another magician that he was a fraud? It doesn't really add up. But to add a twist to the tale, people have studied their notebooks and diaries and found that actually the Davenport brothers, although they confessed to Houdini that it was all fake, they were practicing spiritualists. Like, they seemed to genuinely believe in it, they just knew that they were fake. And to throw another name at you, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books, denied all of the exposures. He was just like, no, the Davenport brothers are legit. What they do is genuine. After all of the evidence had mounted up that that clearly wasn't the case, and even one of the Davenport brothers themselves had basically said it wasn't the case, Arthur Conan Doyle still fully believed in it, which I find absolutely fascinating. So there we have it. That is the true story of the Davenport brothers, a tale that involves so many famous magicians. I mean, the number of names I've mentioned in this video, like John Henry Anderson, Maskelyne and Cook, Robert Houdin, literally Harry Houdini at the end. It is mad, the scale of this story. But I really hope you enjoyed this one, something a little bit different. If you want to see more like this in the future, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care.